One day, a newborn eaglet fell too soon from his nest. A kindly prairie chicken happened by and took the young eaglet to her home to nurse him back to health. Every day, the young eagle learned prairie chicken ways with his prairie chicken brothers and sisters, pecking in the dirt and scurrying around on two legs. Every once in a while, the young eagle would notice beautiful, majestic birds flying overhead with their powerful, outstretched wings, gracefully soaring the heavens. Oh, how he wished he could be like them. Something within him seemed to draw his hopes and dreams toward the sky. But alas, he thought, I am but a prairie chicken, pecking in the dirt, and that's all I'll ever be. And so the eagle was a prisoner of his own beliefs, never getting to expand his great God-given wings and soar the heavens as he was intended to do. He lived and died as a prairie chicken, though in reality he was the most beautiful, powerful bird the Creator ever made. The parable of the eagle and the prairie chicken, lost potential and believing what others think of you, runs through much of Aboriginal encounters with the rest of Canada. 400 years ago, Europeans started settlements in Nova Scotia, but archaeological evidence suggests the ancestors of Mi'kmaq have been here for more than 11,000 years. For much of the time after European contact, Mi'kmaq have been marginalized and deliberately assimilated, wiping out their culture, language, and spirituality. Even more horrific, historians suggest as much as 80% of the native population on the East Coast died from exposure to European diseases in the 10 years after Champlain's contact. That's 80% of hunters, 80% of parents and elders, and 80% of children. That was what contact meant to the Mi'kmaq community. Today, after centuries of forced dependence, there is an awareness among Mi'kmaq that by discovering their traditional culture and language, they can more fully participate in Canadian society. But that's all happening at once.
So a lot of us are looking at that and saying, well, based on past experience, in order for us to succeed, and in order for us to progress, then we have to do things our own way. We have to revert back to our own cultural philosophies, and use those.
Joe B. Marshall. His is a familiar Mi'kmaq story. Orphaned as a baby, brought up in a loving home, but forced into residential school for 5 long years. Determined to get an education, he eventually became a lawyer and is executive director of the organization he helped create, the Union of Nova Scotia Indians.
We've been marginalized. We've been kept out of that society and every aspect of it. You can start with education. You often hear our people talk about the way they've been treated in provincial schools. And that's part of the big part of the reason for our lack of success in education. If you consider people finishing high school, going on to university as success. I mean, there's not only philosophical, cultural, and language barriers in trying to do all those things, and the fact that we speak a different language and it's never been paid attention to in those schools. Nobody ever tried to use it to help us to succeed and move on farther. I mean, people have actually worked actively in keeping us down.
As I was putting my hands up to the Creator, giving thanks.
Where to begin? Education,
We need to know the 7 sacred teachings.
Unless Mi'kmaq are educated and proud of their own culture and have an awareness of North American society, how can they be expected to advance? Business. They want to develop sustainable economies in their 13 small, isolated communities around Nova Scotia. Spirituality. They want to rediscover what makes them unique, this blend of Native beliefs and Catholic faith. And then
Brought your baby in for a checkup? Yeah.
improve health care. Aboriginal health statistics are, in most cases, 10 times worse than the general Canadian population.
So we're just gonna measure her length, her head.
Joe B. sums up the struggle.
What we're actually doing is pulling ourselves forward and at the same time dragging our heels. And that's pretty hard to do.
This is Canada today. A lot of time has passed and we are all moving forward. The Mi'kmaq realize that and are facing it head on. Forget the stereotypes. Many Mi'kmaq are achieving remarkable results. People are making things happen for themselves and their communities. They are taking control and building successes one project at a time. Take Eskasoni, the largest reserve in Nova Scotia, where some 3,100 Mi'kmaq live on the edge of the Labrador Lakes in the middle of Cape Breton. Eskasoni's out-of-the-way location is finally working to its advantage. It has a strong Mi'kmaq language program in its community schools, immersion in grades 1, 2, and 3. And there is a new supermarket, sidewalks, a developing fishery, and a research facility. There's even a community radio station.
Scotia Health Center.
This building is complete with pharmacy, examining rooms, and integrated health treatment programs. It's building bridges across the community, a direct attack on those devastating Aboriginal health statistics.
Every Thursday morning we do home visits.
It's 10 in the morning. Dr. Luli Rafshi and nurse Barb McNeil are making this week's house calls.
How are you doing, Dr. Granny?
Today, they're visiting Dr. Granny, as she is known in the community. They're personal and thorough. For most of us, house calls are unusual, but not here in Eskasoni First Nation. These people organize themselves and are now part of a new approach to health care. The Dwigan Initiative, an integrated health program. Physician visits might include a consult with a nutritionist or a diabetic clinic nurse. Sharon Rudderham is director of the Eskasoni Health Center.
I think that the new approach that the health center has taken is that it's a more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach to patient care. So, for example, when a patient comes in to see the family physician, they may get referred to the nutritionist, they may get referred to the diabetic clinic nurse, they get referred to other components or other services within the health center. And they work collaboratively with the physician in providing the best care that they can.
Change must happen. The facts are grim. Take any Canadian health statistic and multiply it 10 times to get the reality of health issues in Aboriginal communities. Heart disease, diabetes, respiratory ailments, suicide, any health problem is far greater among Aboriginals. But Sharon sees hope in this plan.
The model of care that we have, our physicians are on contract. They're considered salaried physicians. So I think that provinces and community health centers will continue to promote the way that we provide care, and hopefully as new physicians continue to graduate, that there will be a real interest in taking on this type of model.
But the focus of this story is these two women, Lita Bernard and Carrie Paul, both caseworkers for Eskasoni Mental Health and Social Services. They saw a need and took action.
And we said, okay, let's try something. So what ended up happening was we went in, we did an agenda, and it was like each program was customized for that group. about their needs and what, just for that group alone.
It may seem odd that people need to be taught parenting. We've all heard about residential schools and the damage they caused Aboriginal children. That damage was passed on to successive generations of Mi'kmaq children in many ways. If you accept the fact that we learn about parenting by being parented, then what the children of residential schools learned was the strap, strong discipline without love, no hugs, no comfort, and no attachments. In too many cases, that is exactly how they brought up their children. Carrie Paul was the product of dysfunctional parenting and was determined to find another way, to provide her children the love that was missing from her childhood.
Missing as a child would be affection and love, which was a big thing for me. And knowing that someday I was going to have my own child and not let that happen to them. And if I can contribute to the rest of the community, then it's rewarding enough for me.
And I find with the two of us together, it's like where I come from, a long line of culture and traditions, and where her roots go back to the residential school. We have a bridge, and the parenting program is that bridge for us.
A weekday morning, a small conference room in the Eskasoni Mental Health Building. This parenting program is the result of 2 years of trial and error by Lita and Carrie. They have devised a program specifically for Aboriginals. They insist on confidentiality. What goes on and is said in these workshops stays here. Trust is a big deal, and every class and every course is full.
Okay, guys, welcome to our program. No matter what situation that people were going through, nobody wanted to be a bad parent. Parents do parenting instinctively. But when that right is taken away from you as a parent through residential schools and all these other influences in the communities, the parenting program is trying to give that back. Okay, guys. Now we're going to sort you into groups. You're going to be talking about some of the things that you do as parents that feed the good, and some of the things that you do that feed the bad. Let them grow.
Care for them. My kids do their laundry except for the two youngest ones. The two oldest ones do their laundry.
A picture do go mega. Koi little bit of grounded. Jo aside them ta abat tuan. Talkla na kasi.
I love you. When you go to the program, learning to listen to your children and learning to talk to them and not at them, that was more positive for me.
That would be feeding the bad wolf, because you said I'm sorry, but he's still carrying it, okay? He doesn't know that you said I'm sorry.
There was this one time a mother said that she was having a hard time showing affection to her son. And I'm like sitting there knowing what she's talking about, and I'm thinking, I was like that. I'm that person. And it was so hard for me I had a stepson who's 19. I couldn't hug him. I couldn't hug him until his graduating year last year. That's how long it took me to hug my stepson. And it was really emotional because it was a hug waiting to happen for like 16 years. And I have a 5-year-old. I showed so much affection to this child. It's like I couldn't watch him sleeping. I'd start crying because I'm thinking of the times I was little and wanting all this.
We have therapists, counselors, psychologists, with just so many people, working with so many wonderful people. We were able to grow into who we are.
I worked, and then I've got 4 kids at home. Just from getting feedback from other parents, and you're not the only one out there, and you're getting some help from everybody.
Now we need a speaker from each group.
Our good wolf is praise your child, give them a hug,
Participate with playing with your children.
The bad things you gotta make is when you ground your child and then you let them go. You don't stick to it. Because you're not yelling at the kids. Broken promises. Do not listen or pay attention, ignoring them when they're freaking out and bawling.
And respect towards your kids, because if you respect your kids, then your kids begin to respect you. And our bad wolves is like yelling at the children. Sometimes you yell at them for no reason, arguing in front of the kids because they end up picking it up.
You have to love what you do, and I guess we do.
Yeah.
It's rewarding for us, and we're full of enthusiasm, ready to take on anything. We've always been like this.
The Indian Act of 1876 gave control and responsibility for Aboriginals to the Government of Canada. Today, there are 13 First Nations on 42 reserves in Nova Scotia. The result of a plan started in 1942 that saw governments consolidate Mi'kmaq into small, remote reserves, often on poor land, miles from the general population and far from health care and educational facilities. Governments, having created the problems of isolation and dependence, then moved in to provide relief. In effect, they got poverty on a silver platter. Total dependency with never enough resources. Only Member 2, Millbrook, and Acadia are in urban areas. Member 2 was even moved from the Sydney waterfront to a rocky and desolate hill above the city. But look at what they have made of this real estate. A busy convention center with fabulous steakhouse restaurant. Member 2's gaming center serves Cape Breton and eastern Nova Scotia. And world recognition of their ISO business designation has brought alliances with various multinational companies. This has become a familiar icon for many Nova Scotians. The legendary Glooscap overlooks a thriving business retail park and cultural center beside Highway 102 at Millbrook Reserve near Truro. This power center has continued to expand with theaters, an aquaculture farm, and call center. On reserve land in Cole Harbour beside Shearwater, Millbrook is building a high-tech facility for Canada's new helicopter program. These projects are only examples of Aboriginal business successes being developed across the region. But what can be done for some of the rural communities? How are they to develop jobs and sustainable businesses? The Supreme Court's Marshall decision may be the key. It opened the fishery to Mi'kmaq, local people and small communities, jobs close to home. Mi'kmaq strongly believe centuries-old treaties signed in good faith must have some relevance today. And Joe B. Marshall has his eyes on things beyond just fishing. Court decisions have legitimized and upheld rights, but he says they don't want to keep going to the courts. Mi'kmaq now want to negotiate.
Those are the hopes that a lot of us have. Those are the hopes that the 13 chiefs here in Nova Scotia are working with, are banking on. That they will be able to negotiate a fishery that's owned and managed by Mi'kmaq people. With Mi'kmaq people being involved every step of the way, on every facet of it. Not only working on the boats to catch the fish, but working in the processing and marketing of the catch.
Lobster fishermen leave harbors all over Nova Scotia at the crack of dawn to pull their traps. These small businessmen bring a lot to their local communities. Lobstering is a $355 million a year business in Nova Scotia. Doug Howe is a Mi'kmaq living on a satellite of the Millbrook Reserve in Sheet Harbour, here on Nova Scotia's eastern shore. This morning, he's in a hurry.
First thing this morning, it was my outside
string. I had to move that, get it in out of the weather. It's gonna be rough tomorrow. Come up on them, so the rope's coming towards the bow of the boat. Then he gaffs it, puts it up on the hauler, we haul it, clean it out, take the old crabs out, throw them away, take the lobsters out. While I'm banding those, he rebaits a trap, and we find another spot to put it, throw it back overboard, go to the next one. About average, first of the season, we were getting 4 and 5 lobsters a trap. Now it's 1 or 2 every second or third trap. When I got out of high school, I worked construction for about 6 months. Then I took a couple courses and started fishing. Been doing it for 6 or 7 years now. I think it's 3 years on my own.
Doug's father had to travel all over the Maritimes to find construction work to keep his family. John Howe was away for much of his 7 children's lives. Doug has a chance at a different life.
Yeah, life for Doug would be a little better here, fishing. He makes a heck of a lot more money than we did. Like, we had to travel back and forth to Halifax for jobs and work in the woods, work on the road, digging ditches. It's a lot better now.
Doug will be home for supper after a long day on the water, thanks in part to the Marshall decision. The 1999 Supreme Court's Marshall decision confirmed that the 1760 and 1761 treaties provided Mi'kmaq a communal right to hunt, fish, and gather in pursuit of a moderate livelihood. No one was prepared for the aftermath. The decision sparked confusion, protest, and violence like this incident, August 2000, in Burnt Church, New Brunswick. That court decision forced the federal government into action with an unprecedented 4-year program of teaching, outfitting, and licensing native bands on the East Coast. For Millbrook, it's an almost instant sustainable fishery. 50 licenses from digging clams to lobster, snow crab, and ground fishing, jobs for some 60 band members as fishermen, captains, and deckhands. While it has not been easy, for Adrian Glode, manager of Millbrook Fishery, it's a great start.
Overall, it's been really well, especially this year. In 2006, the majority of our licenses are run by First Nation captains that have been trained in the previous years. We took kind of baby steps. Chief and Council looked at it to make sure that these fellows were ready before they did take over the vessel. And this year it's really proven to us that they can take them. They proved to themselves also.
The Howes are carrying on a centuries-old pursuit. The Mi'kmaq spent most of their lives fishing. Historians tell us that hunting and trapping were mainly for clothing and some food, but seafood was the dominant diet. They were Nova Scotia's first highliners, and now they are back on the water.
We've had great non-native captains and people from the community that showed us the way, especially in the Gulf. We had nothing but help over there to teach our First Nation captains what and what not to do. And also in tuna fishing, had a lot of help from the crew up in Mabou. Every time there was success in our fisheries, it had to do with a non-native community or a group of people helping us.
Doug and his father are fishing just off Sheetrock at the mouth of Sheet Harbor in Fisheries District 32, a short lobster season, April 19th to June 20th. Fishermen are on salary until their training is such that they take control of a boat and a license, but no salary for the Howes. Doug is now a full-fledged captain and leases the boat, never ready, with a lobster license for 250 traps from the band's Millbrook Fisheries. The gear is his own, and he and his father put in long days in good weather, knowing they get to keep any money above the monthly lease payment and expenses. It's beginning to pay off for them, and Adrian is impressed with the Howe's work ethic.
They had very good work ethics before the Marshall decision, and that's what I needed with a lot of help like that with my workers. I knew right from the get-go that Doug was going to be a captain. He was going to make it just by obviously the the upbringing from his father, and he know when to go to work.
Anybody will tell you that lobstering is up and down and very hard work, but it is a good life, and it should be a productive life for 25-year-old Doug.
There's a big difference here than cutting pulpwood. It's a little easier on the back, no flies, more money.
Really good year, except for the weather. I haven't had any real problems with the boat this year.
It's a very hard life for the fishermen, but I do know that there's a lot of rewards at the end, and I do believe our fishermen are seeing it now, because I do get a lot of sense of pride of what they've done now.
Native spirituality. Mi'kmaq have a different view of history and traditional values.
Mi'kmaq people are culturally very spiritual. There is a lot in our culture to do with spirituality, and I think more of our people are starting to discover that. When we were converted to Catholicism, our people didn't throw away their own beliefs, their own spirituality, their own practices. They held on to them.
This is Mi'kmaq Band Counselor Todd Labrador of Acadia First Nation, deep in the woods of Nova Scotia, in a birch bark canoe he built. That unique craftsmanship is now in demand all over the world. Last year, he spent 2 weeks building a canoe in Paris. Todd believes in Native spirituality and respects the old ways.
Our people believe that everything has a spirit, and a rock, a tree, a plant, and sometimes we would use a rock to create an object. And so for us, it's a gift from the Creator and from Mother Earth. But so we would use this item, but first we would ask permission.
It is fitting that Todd would respond to the teachings of his forefathers, but it was not always so. It has been a long journey back from his youthful wanderings to Acadia First Nation and the Wildcat Reserve deep in the woods near Kejimkujik National Park.
We always believe is before we know where we're going, we have to know where we came from. Because if we don't know where we came from, no matter where we go, we're going to be lost. And I remember the hardships and when we didn't have much, but we were always happy. But I've had many bumps in my journey, but I was always very pleased to know that I was Mi'kmaq. When you go to church, it's what you were taught, and I have to, I have to be open-minded, and I say, well, that's your belief, and you're entitled to that. But my church is all around me, in the forest and everywhere. That's my belief.
There is a strong Aboriginal connection to this area of Nova Scotia. It was a natural waterway from the Atlantic up through the mighty Mersey River into the chain of lakes in Kejimkujik Park and out to the Bay of Fundy, New Brunswick, Maine, and the world beyond. The Mi'kmaq were travelers and traders, open to ideas and eager to meet new people. There is evidence that Mi'kmaq communicated and traded as far west as the Mississippi. Politically, this was a major meeting place for the Wabanaki Confederacy, and there is a significant spiritual connection here. Kejimkujik Park contains some 60 Mi'kmaq archaeological sites, and the Mersey has recently given up evidence of centuries of life on the river.
we consider it to be sacred. It's the largest concentration of petroglyphs in eastern North America, right here. And now our people didn't have a written language. Our culture was oral. But in this case, it's really unique because it's an area where our people did write something down. And they etched in this stone.
This is familiar ground for Todd Labrador. We are at the site of some of those world-renowned Mi'kmaq petroglyphs carved on the rocks at Kejimkujik Lake in the park. His father, Chief Charles Labrador, was a well-known interpreter of these drawings.
My father always told us, and he always said, we believe that some of the sacred images that were carved in this area on the rocks, we call them petroglyphs today. He said some of those images were really a written history for us. And people would say, you didn't have a written history. We say, well, yes, we did. They're written in petroglyphs. And we're starting to relearn some of what they meant. Some of them are very difficult to see, but there's one right here. It's quite easy to see right now. So here's the hand of the small hand, and at one point in time when these images were photographed, they were traced with a white substance, like a white chalk. And here you can see a little bit of it left. So this image here is of a sailing ship. So the bottom of the ship would be here. It would be a wooden hull ship. And then the front here, and some of the sails. There's one sail here, another little one, and same here. And the mast would be here. So it's difficult to see, and you can see some of the graffiti. A lot of the images are difficult to explain their meaning. But if you look at the scene like this one here, it's quite easy to explain this one. It's a hunting scene. And we can look and see the canoe with two figures, and out front is a whale. And our people would hunt whale in the birch bark canoe. And eventually, Mother Nature will reclaim these, or they'll fade away. But that's the natural process that our elders said, that's the way things are supposed to happen.
For most of Todd's life, he saw his father struggle to establish a reserve in southwestern Nova Scotia. There was little money, but there was a lot of pride and spirituality.
Growing up in school, you tried to sort of fit in with everyone else. You watched TV and you saw cowboys and Indians, and who were the winners? Never the Indians. So it was difficult to say, yes, I'm Mi'kmaq. For some people, it was difficult because they were treated differently and looked down upon. Today, a lot more people are proud. That's part of my heritage, and yes, I'm proud. And it's a wonderful culture, and and they're happy now to learn and also to share. I think maybe for our people, we need more voice. Some of the treaties and some of the agreements are going to be brought into the open again, and we're going to learn that, yes, we do have certain rights. Yes, we do. Now, this is sort of my own personal belief, but I think that what we want to do is to find a solution where we can work together. Like my father said, when the first boats landed on the shores of Mi'kmaq, our ancestors were there with their arms open, welcoming the newcomers. Well, we still have our arms open.
That openness is reflected in the current round of negotiations. At times, history would suggest Europeans considered treaties as simply a way of getting past current disputes lasting as long as a bouquet of cut flowers. When that crisis passed, the treaty could be ignored. Mi'kmaq take the opposite view. The treaties of peace and friendship of the mid-1700s were legal documents that have status, even today. They understand that we have a totally different situation today, but these issues have to be dealt with. The federal and Nova Scotian governments agree, and for the first time in more than 2 centuries, the 3 parties are discussing treaty and rights issues.
I know there's a lot of hurt, and there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of bitterness. It's there. And if we keep anger in us, we're going to make ourselves sick. And I can't blame you for something that your ancestors did.
Mi'kmaq will no longer be ignored or marginalized. When Prime Minister Trudeau and Queen Elizabeth signed the 1982 Constitution Act, they made negotiations a necessity and change inevitable. Education, finally transferred into Mi'kmaq hands in 1997, is seen by Mi'kmaq as essential in helping Aboriginals meet the future.
In the field of education, more of our communities have taken responsibility for the schools in their communities and also for educating their children. I think that's a big plus. I think that's a big success. I think that more of our communities also are realizing that they have to protect their language, they have to protect their culture.
In all parts of our society, there are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Such a person is Sister Dorothy, a Catholic nun with the Congregation of Sisters of St. Martha in Sydney.
With conviction and determination, Dorothy Moore has championed the Mi'kmaq Nation.
Dorothy Moore is a Mi'kmaq, an officer of the Order of Canada, Order of Nova Scotia, and a highly respected educator, thinker, and activist. She was once called a stupid jackass by her elementary school teacher. "Go home. You'll never amount to anything. Leave school and go wash floors," she was told. As a young child, hurtful comments like that would surely break you. They certainly stuck with Sister Dorothy.
And the question was, what comes to your mind? What came to your mind when you were receiving the Order of Nova Scotia? I said, you really want to know what came to my mind? That I am not a stupid jackass. That came to my mind. So it has to be the defining moment.
That determined, bright little girl rose to great heights. What immediately becomes most apparent about this woman is her spirituality, a mix of deeply held Mi'kmaq beliefs and her strong Catholic faith. That and her energy and intelligence. Sister Dorothy has taught students, teachers, educators, and politicians. At 73, she is still working as an education consultant to the Member 2 band. She is in demand as a speaker and lecturer. We caught up with her at a special lecture for St. FX summer students, professional teachers for the most part, here for graduate studies. Joanne Tompkins, associate professor in the School of Education at St. FX, does the introductions.
I have always enjoyed working with Sister. I always feel that she feeds my soul with her words, but she also challenges my mind. And I think I'm just honored that we're able to have her here today. And I can't think of any one person who's made more of a difference with their lives and with the people they've touched than Sister Dorothy Moore. So I welcome you, Sister.
Thank you, Joanne. It certainly is a privilege to come and speak to, I presume that most of you are educators? All of you? Marvelous. Just imagine the change we're going to make in education. Wow.
Sister Dorothy started her teaching career in 1958 in small schools in Tracadie and Cape Breton and then on to Alberta, eventually returning to St. FX for her Bachelor of Education degree. At that point, she was asked to come back to Eskasoni and teach. That first day was life-altering.
And my very first day in Eskasoni, I got a very shocking news that my father had taken a massive heart attack, and he passed away. So the beginning of Eskasoni, and it did have a real lasting beginning in a sense of my father had to die for me to realize what being a Mi'kmaq was. He was so proud of his ancestry as a Mi'kmaq. He was so proud of his language, his culture, his traditions, and he promoted them with us. And we could not come home. Even when I came from Alberta, I hadn't spoken the language for a couple of years. I lost the fluency of it. And I came home, I was so proud to be home. And I was home no longer than 10 minutes. And he said, okay, you're under my roof now, speak the language. I burst out crying because I couldn't. And I said, just give me time, just give me time. I did. And some of those things that he promoted, I resented. I resented. Because I resented it because I felt, what does it mean to be an Indian? Doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean a thing to me because it hurts to be an Indian. And in those days, prior to that, even when I went to Alberta, I could hide. I used to wear a habit. I could hide. Nobody would know who I was. And that was fine. But when my father passed away, it was like something was created in me. And I wanted from there to continue to promote my language, my history. I wanted to be Indian. I wanted to be Mi'kmaq. I wanted to be everything my father had, his values. I wanted to take those on. I experienced residential school. I was 9 years old when I went. I was in grade 3. I didn't speak the English language. I could never put enough words together to make a sentence. Let's say I understood some of it. I remember the very first day in that classroom in grade 3 when I was being taught division. And I couldn't understand, I just could not comprehend what it all meant. I couldn't understand my teacher. And every mistake I made, I got a whack on the fingers with a side of a ruler. Until my hands were so bruised, then I was sent up to the board and I got whacked on the head every time I made a mistake. And it was just a constant one mistake after another. And the reason being, I didn't understand it.
Dorothy Moore's early education was marked by misunderstanding, impatience, and hurtful comments from her teachers. Such was her 6-year legacy of residential school. In grade 8, she became the first Mi'kmaq to enroll in a Sydney public school. Grade 8 was wonderful, taught by a nun who would change her life. But grade 9 was another matter.
I had 2 teachers who were very racist. And like I told you, I have a fear of, as soon as I experience anything between the teacher and myself, I really have great fear and I don't learn anything. But one particular time, I did not do my homework because I didn't know how to paraphrase a poem. And this nun asked me to come up to the front. In those days, they had a platform and the teacher always stayed up front. And I know she went to reach me, and I stepped back and knocked the little table over. And I guess I really angered her. And she said, "See that door? You go home. You go home to the backwoods where you belong, and I don't want to ever see you again." I did go home. my parents, of course, because they did not support me to go to the public school, said to me, "We told you so. You didn't belong there. You don't belong there. Now, you go work and support yourself." And so I did. I worked downtown in a laundry. And, but this nun I had in grade 8 contacted me a number of months later and asked me, would I like to go back to school? Would I like to continue? I said, oh yes. Okay, I'll make arrangements for you to go to Mabu. There was a boarding school in Mabu. I went to Mabu, and oh, what a glorious year I had. I led the class. In Wabanaki, at the residential school, I had been labeled a stupid jackass. And to be able to reverse that and go to the boarding school here and lead the class was a real reawakening of who I am. That I am capable, I am able to do it.
That was the foundation for a brilliant career and spiritual life, dedicated to the education of children through her teaching and her devotion to the Sisters of St. Martha. Various jobs, numerous responsibilities and successes, always championing her culture, her people, and children in general.
Residential school is a black mark on our history. I should say one of the black marks in our history. When you think of some children who went there 6 years old and did not get out till 16 years of age, what that meant, they have lost contact with their communities, they lost contact with their language, they lost contact with their culture, and most of all, lost contact who they are. Rita Joe was at residential school when I was there. And you all know of Rita Joe. She's a wonderful poetess, well known. And she wrote this poem, and I always have to recite this poem. That's called, I Lost My Talk. I lost my talk, the talk you took away, when I was a little girl at Wabanaki school. You snatched it away. I speak like you. I think like you. I create like you. The scrambled ballad about my word. Two ways I talk, both ways I say. Your way is more powerful. So gently, I offer my hand and ask, let me find my talk so I can teach you about me. I think that's a very powerful poem because who we are is in our voices. So language is important to us, and language is continuing to diminish, and I don't know what we need to do to bring it back. And if we lose it, we can't go anywhere to bring it back. We can't go to France. We can't go to Scotland. We can't go to Czechoslovakia, Hungary, or any of those countries because our language is rooted here. And it's a real concern.
The focus of the lecture on this day was inclusion. Even without minorities in a class, teachers must talk and teach inclusion.
Is your curriculum reflective of the history, the culture, the language, the treaties and achievements of First Nations people? Even if you put a little thing in, all you have to do is watch the newspapers and see what Member 2 is doing. See what Millbrook is doing in progress. But our people had to do it. Our people had to be the ones to say, we are going to take a risk. We are taking a risk to develop this or to establish that. It's paying off. Thank you.
And so it is that some rise above racism and adversity with an intelligence and grace that benefits all citizens for generations to come. Teaching the teachers and practicing her deep spirituality, Sister Dorothy Moore starts every day in meditation.
If I didn't have the time for reflection, for prayer in my daily life, I don't think I could operate at all. I don't think I could be so peaceful at meetings. I don't think I could be so helpful anywhere, whether it's work or recreation or church. My life, my prayer life, my spiritual life is the key to my survival. I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you wearing a symbol that symbolizes that I have been in religious life for 52 years. I don't know, it has to speak of the fact that it was authentic. It was a call from God to come, and I came and stayed.
Oh. Well, hello. How nice to see you again.
Thank you, thank you. It's always good to see you.
On this warm summer day, Dorothy Moore is visiting the nun who some 50 years ago changed her life by arranging for her to go back to school in Mabu.
What have you been up to?
Sister Anne Mary McNeil of the Congregation of Notre Dame. At 91, she seems 20 years younger, an intelligent and humble woman who saw only the potential of a quiet, shy Mi'kmaq student and reached out.
And do you remember this? After I left school, after several months, you got in touch with me and asked me to come to see you. And
yes, I
you
do.
Gave me that.
I do. That's a good many years ago,
Yeah.
Dorothy.
1951.
And that's when you thought you had finished with school, I think.
Well, I thought I was finished school because I thought nobody wanted me in school.
Yes.
There's that little slip of paper. This was given to me by Mother St. Joseph of Mercy, which was your name at that time, Holy Angels Convent, Sydney, Nova Scotia, in the month of March 1951. Dorothy Moore, Sydney, Nova Scotia. In remembrance of her, I will always keep it as a treasure. Look how yellow it is.
Yes,
it's aging.
Yes. Well, I never realized, really, that I had
a hand in bringing me back?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I think since that day, I haven't stopped.
Change is happening in Mi'kmaq society. People are taking responsibility and building successes. It all fosters pride. With historic negotiations now underway, perhaps in this century, the Mi'kmaq will become the people of a new dawn.
I'm hoping that Mi'kmaq society, Mi'kmaq people, will be taking more responsibility for themselves, their people, and applying more of their cultural philosophies, of their traditions, customs, their language, in everything that they do. But we first have to go through all that struggle of educating ourselves.
We are called the Mi'kmaq people, we all love this land. We were put here to protect her and lend a helping hand. We are keepers of the forest, watchers of the sea. We live alongside with nature perfect harmony. We call upon each one